Imagine the scene. The air tastes of salt and rot. It's a thick, hot soup that clings to your skin, soaks your uniform, and fills your lungs with every desperate gasp. You're on a godforsaken island in the Pacific, 1944. The jungle is a solid, living wall of green, buzzing, chirping, screaming with a life that seems to want you dead. The war has ground on for years. You've seen things. You've heard things. You think you know what combat is. Then you hear it. A sound that starts low, a collective murmur from the depths of the jungle, and then it rises. It's not a scream of rage, not a battle cry. It's a chant, a rhythmic, almost ceremonial, Tenno Haika Banzai. Long live the Emperor. You and your buddies in the foxhole look at each other. A nervous grin cracks through the grime on your face. Because you've heard the stories. You've been briefed. This is it. The infamous Banzai Charge. And the intelligence reports, the old hands, they all said the same thing. A lot of those Japanese soldiers, especially the ones in the rear echelons, they're not even properly armed. They're carrying spears. Bamboo spears. Sharpened sticks. And you laugh. You can't help it. It's a laugh born of tension, of fear, of the sheer, absurd spectacle of it. In the face of your M1 Garand, your Browning automatic rifle, your water-cooled machine guns, they're coming with pointed sticks? It's primitive. It's medieval. It's laughable. But then, the jungle line erupts. Not with a disciplined line of infantry, but with a tidal wave of humanity. Hundreds of men, their faces contorted, their eyes wide with a fervor you cannot comprehend, pouring out of the green gloom. And they are not stopping. They are running, screaming, a human tsunami aimed directly at your line. And the laughter dies in your throat. It dies because you realize this isn't a tactical maneuver. This is something else entirely. This is a force of nature. And you are directly in its path. This is the story of that laughter and the brutal, shocking moment it stopped. This is the story of the American GI facing a form of warfare for which no training could ever truly prepare him. It's a story of cultural collision on the most violent battlefield imaginable, where American industrial might and individual initiative met Japanese spiritual conviction and a willingness to die that defied all Western logic. This is the story of the Banzai Charge. And we're going to understand it from both sides of the barrel. To understand the laughter, you have to understand the chasm. The absolute, fundamental gulf in thinking between the American GI and the Japanese soldier he faced in the island-hopping campaign of World War II. For the American boy from Kansas or New York, war was a job. A terrible, dirty, horrifying job, but a job nonetheless. You were a citizen called to arms. Your goal was to defeat the enemy, sure, but your primary, gut-level, every single day goal was to survive. To do your part, yes, but to make it back home. Back to your family, your girl, your dad's farm, your job at the factory. The entire American military system was built around this concept. It was a machine designed to preserve its human components. You were taught to fire and maneuver, to use cover, to call in artillery, to not be a hero if it meant throwing your life away for no gain. The American way of war was pragmatic, industrial, and ultimately rooted in the value of the individual life. Now, cross the ocean and step into the mind of the Japanese soldier. He was not a citizen soldier. He was a warrior in a sacred cause. For centuries, the samurai code of Bushido had glorified honor above all else, above life itself. To die for the emperor, who was a living god, was the ultimate purification, the ultimate glory. Surrender was the ultimate disgrace. A captured soldier brought eternal shame upon his family, his village, his entire lineage. In the Japanese Imperial Army, this was codified in the Senjinkan, the Field Service Code, which every soldier memorized. Do not live in shame as a prisoner. Die, and leave no ignominious crime behind you. Think about that for a second. Let it sink in. Your entire military and cultural framework is built on a foundation where death in battle is not a failure, but a success. A victorious outcome. Survival, if it meant capture or retreat, was a personal and national catastrophe. This wasn't just theory. This was drilled into them with brutal, often savage, training. Officers would strike enlisted men for the slightest infraction. The group was everything, the individual nothing. This created a military force of incredible endurance, ferocity, and a terrifying willingness for self-annihilation. So, when the American and the Japanese soldier finally met on some tiny, coral atoll hellhole, they weren't just speaking different languages. They were operating on different planets of thought. The GI, with his K-rations and his mail from home and his dreams of a post-war fort, looked at the Japanese soldier and saw a fanatic. The Japanese soldier, shivering with malaria, starving, cut off from supply, looked at the GI and saw a weak, materialistic individual who cared more for his own skin than for his nation's honor. This is the powder keg, and the banzai charge was the match. The first major, shocking taste of this for the United States Marine Corps came not in 1944, but earlier, on a place that would become synonymous with Marine Corps legend, Guadalcanal, 1942. The Marines had landed. They'd captured the vital airfield, later renamed Henderson Field. They were dug in along a perimeter, a thin, green line holding back the jungle and the Japanese forces trying to push them into the sea. The fighting was brutal, a close-quarters nightmare in the mud and rain. Then, on the night of September 12th to 13th, along a grassy ridge that would be christened Bloody Ridge, it happened. The Japanese commander, General Kyoto Koguchi, launched a massive, coordinated night attack aimed at shattering the American lines. The Marines heard them coming long before they saw them. The clinking of equipment, the rustle of grass, the guttural shouts. And then the flares went up, painting the night in an eerie, hellish light. And what the Marines saw froze the blood in their veins. They weren't advancing. They were charging. A screaming, howling mass of soldiers, bayonets fixed, some even waving swords, coming straight at their positions. They came in waves, ignoring their own casualties, trampling over their own dead and wounded. They hit the marine wire and kept coming, using their own bodies to create bridges for the men behind them. This was the first large-scale, organized banzai charge against American forces. And it was a shock to the system. The Marines fought with a desperate, wild fury. Machine guns overheated, their barrels glowing cherry red in the darkness. Men used their rifles as clubs when the Japanese broke into their foxholes. It was primal, savage combat. One Marine, Private John Basilone, a machine gun section leader, became a legend that night. When his crew was decimated, he fought on alone, manning his heavy .30 caliber, mowing down wave after wave, his hands blistering on the hot metal. When the gun jammed, he used his pistol. When that was empty, he used his fists. He held his section of the line, a one-man bulwark against the human tsunami. He would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions. But for every Basilone, there were a dozen anonymous Amarins who simply did their job, who stood their ground in the face of a form of warfare that seemed to defy the very laws of physics and self-preservation. The Japanese were slaughtered. They died by the hundreds. In the cold light of dawn, the ridge was carpeted with their bodies. Tactically, from the American perspective, it was a failure for the Japanese. They had not broken the line. They had sacrificed a huge portion of their effective fighting force for no gain. But that's the point. The American military mind looked at that and saw a catastrophic, stupid waste of life. The Japanese command saw a glorious, if unsuccessful, attempt to shatter the enemy with spirit. They saw Yamato Damashii, the Japanese spirit, in its purest form. And this cultural disconnect, this fundamental failure to understand the enemy's core motivation, is why, 2 years later on islands like Saipan and Peleliu, the laughter would still start when the chanting began. The GIs had heard the stories, but they hadn't yet truly internalized the lesson. They still saw the bamboo spear as a joke, not as a symbol of an entire philosophy of war. So, the stage is set. The Americans, masters of the machine, believers in the individual. The Japanese, disciples of the spirit, believers in the group unto death. They've clashed on Guadalcanal, on Tarawa, and the lessons have been written in blood. But the deepest, most horrifying, and most consequential lessons were yet to be learned. Because as the war progressed and the noose tightened around Japan, the banzai charges didn't stop. They got bigger. They got more desperate. And they culminated in a nightmare on an island called Saipan, where the charge wouldn't just be a military attack, it would become a national tragedy, a spectacle of death so vast it would shock the world and force the laughter to stop forever. What happened when thousands of soldiers and civilians, armed with little more than belief, hurled themselves at the guns of an industrial war machine? That's where we're going next. Don't go away. So the laughter died on Bloody Ridge. It was replaced by the grim, professional respect of men who have stared into an abyss and found a way, somehow, to not fall in. The Marines on Guadalcanal learned a brutal truth. The man who does not fear death holds a terrifying advantage. But the war moved on. The island-hopping campaign gathered pace, leaping ever closer to Japan's inner ring of defense. And with each new island, a new batch of green American boys, Army GIs now, alongside the Marines, would land, their heads filled with stories they thought were just tall tales. They'd hear the intelligence briefings. The enemy is fanatical. He will not surrender. He may attack in mass charges. And some of the old salts, the Guadalcanal or Tarawa veterans with the 1,000-yard stare, would just nod silently. They knew. But for the new guys, it was abstract. It was hard to truly believe, to feel it in your gut, until you were the one in the foxhole, listening to that chant begin in the darkness. This is the story of that education. The grinding, bloody process of turning American disbelief into hardened, grim reality. We're leaving the early shocks of 1942 and moving into the meat grinder of 1944, where the stakes were higher, the Japanese defenses more desperate, and the banzai charges evolved from a tactical shock into a strategic, almost apocalyptic, phenomenon. Let's land with the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions and the Army's 27th Infantry Division on Saipan, June 15, 1944. If you thought Guadalcanal was bad, Saipan was a different circle of hell. It was larger, more heavily defended, and for the Japanese, it was strategically critical. Saipan was part of the Marianas Islands. From here, the new, terrifyingly long-range B-29 superfortresses could reach the Japanese home islands. Losing Saipan meant the war was coming to Japan's doorstep. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, knew he couldn't win a prolonged war of attrition. He was outgunned, outnumbered, and his supply lines were severed. The American naval and air bombardment was a constant, earth-shattering storm. For the Japanese soldier dug into the island's caves, ridges, and sugarcane fields, the world was a perpetual earthquake of explosions. The psychological pressure was immense. So, what were his options? A slow, grinding defeat, being blasted out of cave by American flamethrowers and explosives? Or a final, glorious, decisive blow? A charge so massive, so infused with the Yamato spirit, that it would shatter the American will even if it couldn't shatter their lines. It was the logic of the samurai, scaled up to an entire army. Meanwhile, the American GIs and Marines, after a brutal fight to secure the beachhead, were pushing inland. The fighting was savage. The Japanese defenders used the terrain with masterful, brutal skill. Every cave was a strong point, every ridge a murderous ambush. The Americans were learning, adapting. They developed corkscrew and blowtorch tactics, use explosives to seal a cave, then a flamethrower to incinerate what was inside. It was gruesome, close-quarters work. And as the American noose tightened, compressing the Japanese into a smaller and smaller pocket on the northern end of the island, the tension became a physical thing in the air. You could feel it. The Americans knew the Japanese were cornered. They knew the stories. They expected a big attack. But what does big really mean when you're facing an enemy who has redefined the very concept of scale in human sacrifice? Let's get personal. Let's get down into a foxhole with two men. We'll call them PFC Jimmy O'Hara from Chicago and Corporal Bill, Preacher, Jones from Alabama. They're with the 2nd Marine Division, dug in on the front lines near a place called Paradise Valley. It's the night of July 6, 1944. The air is thick and heavy. The stench is indescribable, a mix of cordite, rotting flesh, and the sweet, cloying smell of crushed sugarcane. The night is alive with the usual sounds, the distant crump of artillery, the chattering of machine guns somewhere down the line, the moans of the wounded that nobody can reach. O'Hara, 19 years old, is trying to light a damp cigarette. "You hear that, Preacher?" he whispers. "It's quiet. Too quiet." Preacher, a veteran of Tarawa, just grunts, his eyes scanning the impenetrable blackness beyond their wire. "They're out there, kid. Getting ready." "Another one of their crazy charges?" O'Hara says, trying to sound nonchalant. "Heard the guys on the line last week got hit by a few hundred. Said it was a slaughter. Like shooting ducks in a barrel." Preacher turns to him, his face grim in the faint starlight. "Son, you listen to me. You forget that duck in a barrel nonsense. What's coming ain't a battle. It's a ritual. They ain't trying to take our position. They're trying to die. And they aim to take as many of us with 'em as they can. You see 'em coming, you shoot. You don't stop to think. You don't stop to feel sorry for 'em. You shoot until your barrel melts, you hear me?" O'Hara nods, but you can see he doesn't fully believe it. How can he? The human mind isn't built to comprehend that level of collective suicide. Then it starts. Not from one place, but from everywhere in the Japanese lines. A low, humming sound that grows into a roar. Thousands of voices, chanting, screaming, "Banzai! Banzai! Tenno Haika Banzai!" It's a sound that doesn't seem human. It's the sound of a beehive, a hurricane, and a madhouse all at once. And then the fireworks. The Japanese, in a final act of destruction, begin firing off their remaining flares and star shells, illuminating the entire valley in a ghostly, surreal light. And what O'Hara and Preacher see makes the blood in their veins turn to ice water. This isn't a few hundred men. This is a river. A flood. Thousands of Japanese soldiers are pouring out of the darkness. But it's not just soldiers. There are walking wounded, men with bloody bandages, hobbling on sticks. There are clerks and cooks, armed with whatever they can find, rifles, swords, and yes, sharpened bamboo spears. And mixed in with them are civilians, Japanese civilians who had been living on the island, terrified men, women, and even some children, swept up in this terrible, final tide. They are not running in a disciplined formation. They are a mob, a tsunami of humanity, screaming, crying, singing, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and ecstatic fervor. At their head, some accounts say, was General Saito himself, too sick to walk, carried on a litter by his men, a samurai sword in his hand, leading his entire command to its glorious end. The American line erupts. Every machine gun, every rifle, every mortar, every artillery piece that can be brought to bear opens up. The noise is deafening, a physical force that punches you in the chest. Tracer fire stitches red lines through the night, converging on the human wave. The scene is lit by the hellish strobe of explosions and the steady, relentless streams of bullets from the machine guns. O'Hara is firing his M1 Garand on semi-automatic, the ping of the ejecting clip lost in the cacophony. He's not aiming anymore. He's just pointing and shooting into the mass. He sees a Japanese soldier, no older than him, take a hit and spin around, only to be trampled by the dozens behind him. He sees a man with a bamboo spear take 3, 4, 5 rounds to the chest, but his momentum carries him forward another 10 yards before he collapses. They are so close he can see their faces, see the madness and the determination in their eyes. Preacher is right. This isn't a battle. It's a slaughter. But it's a slaughter that is slowly, inexorably, washing up against the American lines. The sheer weight of numbers is overwhelming. In some sectors, the wave crashes over the foxholes. The fighting descends into a bayonet and entrenching tool free-for-all. Men are bludgeoned, stabbed, and shot at point-blank range. O'Hara sees a Japanese officer, waving a sword, leap into a neighboring foxhole. He hears a brief, choked scream, and then silence. The fear is no longer abstract. It is a cold, sharp knife in his belly. He understands, in that moment, why Preacher told him to never stop shooting. Because if you stop, this wave will consume you. For hours, the charge continues. Wave after wave after wave. The Americans fire until their guns jam from overuse, until they run out of ammunition and have to resort to their knives. The ground in front of their positions becomes a grotesque carpet of the dead and dying. The smell of blood and gunpowder is so thick you can taste it. And somewhere in that long, terrible night, the last vestige of laughter, of any thought that this was somehow primitive or absurd, vanishes from the mind of every American on that line. The bamboo spear was never a joke. It was a statement that said, we have nothing left but our spirit, and we will spend it all here, tonight, to show you what you are up against. The irony is profound. The Japanese command believed this ultimate display of spirit would break the American will. In many ways, it had the opposite effect. It didn't break them, it hardened them. It stripped away any last illusions about the nature of their enemy. It transformed the American soldier from a man fighting a war against a nation into a man fighting for survival against an ideology that celebrated death. The laughter was replaced by a cold, focused, and utterly ruthless determination. They weren't just fighting soldiers anymore. They were fighting a concept, and the only way to win was to annihilate it. Dawn broke over Saipan on July 7, 1944, revealing a scene from a nightmare. The landscape was littered with over 4,000 Japanese bodies, heaped in windrows in front of the American lines. The Great Saipan Banzai Charge was over. It was the largest and most devastating such attack of the entire Pacific War. Tactically, it was a catastrophic failure for the Japanese. It wiped out their last organized fighting force on the island. But the shockwaves were just beginning. The charge itself was only the prelude to an even more horrifying act of mass suicide, as thousands of Japanese civilians, terrified of the American barbarians they had been told would torture and murder them, followed the soldiers' example. They jumped from the cliffs at Marpy Point, mothers clutching their children, choosing death over capture. The American GIs and Marines who witnessed this were left with psychological scars that would never fully heal. They had won. They had held the line. But they had stared into the heart of a darkness so complete that it changed them forever. The war had taken another brutal turn. And as the Americans looked toward the next islands, Paililiu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, a grim question hung in the air. If this was what the enemy was capable of on Saipan, what fresh hell awaited them next? The answer would be found in a new, even more terrifying tactic that made the Banzai Charge look almost civilized. The concept of the charge was dead. It was being replaced by the reality of the spider hole, the hidden machine gun nest, and the fight to the last man, not in a glorious rush, but in a slow, grinding, cave-by-cave defense that would extract a blood price beyond anything yet seen. The laughter was gone. Now, only the grim work of the grinding stone remained. The dawn after the Great Saipan Banzai Charge didn't bring relief. It brought a silence that was somehow louder than the night's carnage. A silence broken only by the moans of the few wounded still moving in that vast field of the dead, and the buzzing of flies already beginning their grisly work. For the American GI and Marine, surveying that scene, victory felt hollow, coated in a layer of horror and a deep, unsettling confusion. They had won. They had annihilated the enemy's last organized resistance. The island was effectively theirs. But as they walked among the thousands of bodies, seeing the mix of soldiers and civilians, the rifles and the bamboo spears, a grim understanding settled in. They hadn't just defeated an army. They had witnessed the collapse of an entire worldview. And the question that haunted every man there was a simple one. What kind of enemy does this? The laughter was a distant, shameful memory now. In its place was a cold, professional respect, tinged with a kind of awe for the terrible power of fanaticism. The Banzai Charge, as a large-scale tactic, died on the slopes of Saipan. The Japanese command, even in their desperation, could see the brutal math. 4,000 of your best remaining troops for negligible tactical gain was not a sustainable strategy. But the spirit behind the charge, the absolute refusal to surrender, the willingness to die to the last man, that didn't die. It just evolved. It became more personal, more insidious, and in many ways, far more deadly. The Americans had learned to defeat the human wave. Now they had to learn how to defeat the human rock. A rock that was dug in, hidden, and prepared to bleed them dry for every inch of ground. Welcome to Paililiu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. This is the next phase of the war in the Pacific, a phase defined by a new Japanese defense doctrine. Fukaku, a deep, honeycombed, and mutually supporting defense in depth. The days of wasteful banzai charges were over. Now, the order was to make the Americans pay in blood and time for every single yard. The mastermind behind this shift was a man American intelligence knew all too well, General Tadamaki Kurabayashi. A brilliant, thoughtful officer who had studied in America, he understood the American mind and the American way of war better than perhaps any other Japanese commander. He knew that a banzai charge was exactly what the Americans wanted, a chance to use their overwhelming firepower to destroy the enemy in the open. So he forbade them. On Iwo Jima, his orders were explicit: do not plan for my return. And his strategy was chillingly simple: there would be no defense of the beaches. Let the Americans land. Let them come ashore. And then from a labyrinth of over 1,500 interconnected caves, tunnels, and pillages carved into the volcanic rock of Mount Suribachi and the island's rocky interior, kill them. Kill them from hidden positions. Kill them with interlocking fields of fire. Kill them with sniper and mortar teams that would fire a few shots and then disappear back into the mountain. Every man was to become a fortress. Every death was to be sold at the highest possible price. This was no longer the explosive, chaotic drama of the charge. This was a slow, grinding, terrifying siege. A war of inches fought in a subterranean nightmare. Let's follow a Marine fire team from the 5th Division on Iwo Jima. It's a week after the landings. The black sand beaches are secured, but the real fight is just beginning. We're with Sergeant Jack "Gunny" McCloskey, a veteran of 3 campaigns, and his 2 new replacements, PFC Leo, the Kid, Marino, and PFC Frank, Doc Henderson, who's carrying a satchel of medical supplies and a flamethrower. They're part of a company tasked with clearing a section of the rocky, broken terrain the Marines called the meat grinder. The heat is blistering. The smell of sulfur from the volcano mixes with the ever-present stench of death. The landscape is a jagged, alien thing, offering little cover. Move slow, Gunny grunts, his eyes constantly scanning the rocks. They're in the ground. They see you before you see them. Kid Leo is jumpy. I don't see nothing, Gunny. It just rocks. That's when the first shot cracks out. It doesn't come from a tree line or a ridge. It comes from a seemingly solid patch of ground 50 yards ahead. A puff of dust kicks up near Leo's boot. Sniper! Spider hole! Gunny yells, and they all hit the deck. For 10 minutes, nothing. The silence is oppressive. Then, a thump from a different direction. A mortar round. It's not aimed to kill them directly. It's meant to keep their heads down, to herd them. They're working us, Gunny says, his voice low and tense. The sniper pins us, the mortar tries to flush us. Standard drill. He spots a slight discoloration in the rock face off to their left. A cleverly camouflaged firing port. He signals to Doc Henderson. Frank, that fissure. 10 o'clock. Give it a taste. Doc hefts the flamethrower. The weapon is heavy. The fuel tanks a death sentence on his back if a bullet pierces them. He crawls forward, finding a small fold in the ground for cover. He takes a deep breath, then rises to one knee and squeezes the trigger. A roaring, liquid whoosh fills the air. A tongue of orange and black fire, thick as a man's leg, lashes out and licks the rock face. The heat is so intense they can feel it from their position. For a second, nothing. Then a scream. A high, piercing shriek of pure agony from inside the rock. A Japanese soldier, his uniform on fire, stumbles out of a hidden entrance they hadn't even seen, flailing and screaming before collapsing into a smoldering heap. The Kid, Leo, vomits onto the black volcanic grit. Welcome to Iwo Jima, son, Gunny says, his voice devoid of any emotion. They're not charging anymore. They're waiting. This was the new normal. This was the calculus of death that had replaced the banzai charge. It was a slow, meticulous, and soul-destroying process of finding, sealing, and burning out an enemy who had become one with the island itself. The fear was different now. It wasn't the heart-pounding terror of a screaming horde. It was a slow-burning, constant dread. The dread of the unseen shot, the hidden mine, the silent, waiting enemy in the rock beneath your feet. But the old spirit wasn't completely gone. Even under Kuribayashi's strict orders, the pressure cooker of certain defeats sometimes proved too much. The urge for one final, glorious act of Yamato Damashii would occasionally boil over. On the night of March 8, 1945, deep into the battle for Iwo Jima, it happened. Elements of the Japanese forces, bottled up in the northern part of the island, could take the constant bombardment and the slow, creeping advance of the flamethrowers no longer. In a direct contradiction of Kuribayashi's commands, several hundred soldiers launched a final, desperate banzai charge against the lines of the 21st Marine Regiment. It was a ghost from the past. The screaming, the chanting, the wild, reckless rush. But this time, the American reaction was different. There was no laughter, no disbelief. There was only a grim, practiced efficiency. The Marines had been expecting this. Their lines were ready. Machine guns pre-sighted, mortars zeroed in. The charge was cut to pieces in minutes. It was a futile, almost pathetic echo of Saipan. A handful of Japanese soldiers even broke into a Marine command post, causing chaos and killing a beloved battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harry Liversedge, in a fierce, close-quarters fight before they were all killed. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Kuribayashi, the brilliant modern tactician, had been betrayed by the very ancient spirit he was trying to harness. His own men, unable to endure his new, patient form of warfare, had reverted to the old, wasteful one. And the Americans, who had once been shocked by such tactics, now cut them down with the cold precision of butchers in a slaughterhouse. They had learned. They had adapted. The banzai charge was now just a target of opportunity. The battle for Iwo Jima ground on for another month after that final, futile charge. When it was over, nearly 7,000 Americans were dead and over 20,000 wounded. Of the 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 were taken prisoner. The rest were killed. Kuribayashi got his wish. He had made the Americans pay a staggering price for a tiny, barren island. But the lessons of Iwo Jima and the ghost of the banzai charge were about to be applied on a scale that would dwarf everything that came before. The next island was Okinawa, the gateway to Japan itself. Here, the Americans would face the largest concentration of Japanese troops yet, dug into the most sophisticated defensive lines of the war. And here, the concept of mass suicide would reach its terrifying, logical conclusion, not just among soldiers, but from the skies above. The banzai charge was dead, but its twisted offspring, the kamikaze, was waiting. And this new horror wouldn't be aimed at foxholes on a beach. It would be aimed at the very fleet that made the American advance possible. The calculus of death was about to get a lot more complicated. Okinawa. The name itself sounds like a final, exhausted sigh. By the spring of 1945, it was the last stepping stone. The last island fortress standing between the American juggernaut and the sacred soil of Japan. The lessons of Saipan and Iwo Jima had been seared into the American military consciousness. They knew the drill. They expected a bloody, cave-by-cave, rock-by-rock fight of attrition against a foe who could not, surrender. And they were right. The Japanese 32nd Army, under General Mitsuru Ushijima, had turned the southern part of the island into a fortress more formidable than anything yet seen. They learned from Kuribayashi. They learned from Saito. There would be no wasteful banzai charges. Not on the ground, at least. But the American High Command, for all its intelligence and planning, made a critical, almost fatal, miscalculation. They believed that the Japanese commitment to death before surrender was a tactical choice, one that could be outmaneuvered and outfought with superior firepower and tactics. They still, on some fundamental level, did not grasp that it was a cultural imperative, one that could adapt and find new, even more horrifying forms of expression. They had learned to stop laughing at the bamboo spear. They had not yet learned to stop underestimating the spirit that wielded it. And that spirit was about to take flight. The first one looked like a mistake. A lone Japanese plane, diving erratically out of the clouds towards a U.S. warship off the coast of the Philippines in October 1944. Anti-aircraft guns filled the sky with black puffs of flak. The plane weaved, but it didn't pull up. It kept diving, faster and faster, A comet of metal and fire aimed directly at the ship's deck. The impact was a thunderclap of flame and shrapnel. It was the first official kamikaze, the Divine Wind. By the time of the Okinawa invasion, the kamikaze was no longer a curiosity, it was a strategy. A planned, organized, and systematic campaign of suicide attacks. And it was, in its essence, the banzai charge taken to its logical, technological extreme. Think about it. The banzai charge was a mass infantry assault where the individual soldier was the weapon, his life the ammunition. The kamikaze was the same concept, just projected into a new domain. The pilot was the weapon. His airplane, often barely airworthy and loaded with explosives, was simply the delivery system for his own death. The spirit was identical, the ultimate sacrifice for the emperor, the belief that one man's willing death could shatter the materialistic might of the enemy. For the sailors of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, standing watch off the coast of Okinawa, this new reality was a psychological torment unlike any faced by the men on land. A soldier on Iwo Jima could dig a deeper foxhole, use the terrain. A sailor on a destroyer picket ship, the Sitting Ducks, stationed far out to give early warning, had nowhere to hide. The ocean was a flat, featureless killing zone. You stood on the deck, watching the sky, waiting for a dot to appear and grow into your death. The fear was a constant, gnawing companion. You'd hear the air raid sirens, a sound that now meant not just danger, but a specific, intimate kind of death. You'd see the specks in the distance, the CP combat air patrol, of your own Hellcats and Corsairs swirling in a deadly ballet, trying to intercept them. But some always got through. You'd watch a plane, trailing smoke, its wings shredded, but still coming. Unstoppable. You'd feel the ship vibrate as every gun, from the massive 5-inch cannons down to the chattering 20mm Oerlikons, opened up, trying to throw up a wall of steel. The noise was deafening, the smell of cordite thick. You'd see the tracers arcing towards the speck, and you'd pray for a fireball, for a wing to tear off. But sometimes the speck kept coming. It grew larger, and you could see the red Hinomaru on the wings. You could almost see the pilot in the cockpit. And in that final, terrifying second, you realized you were not fighting a machine. You were fighting a man. A man who had already accepted his death and was now using it as a weapon against you. The emotional impact was devastating. It created a unique form of battle fatigue. There was no release, no counterattack. Just defense. Just waiting. The strain turned boys into old men in a matter of weeks. Let's go to the bridge of the destroyer USS Laffey, DD-724. It's April 16, 1945. The Laffey is on radar picket duty, station number 1, the most dangerous post in the entire fleet. We're with the captain, Commander Frederick Beckton, and a young signalman, Seaman First Class James, Jimmy, Legg, 19 years old from Toledo, Ohio. The morning had already been hell. They'd been under attack for hours. 4 kamikazes had already hit them. Fires were burning amidships. The aft 5-inch gun mount was a twisted wreck, the men inside incinerated. The stench of burning fuel, cooked flesh, and electrical fires was overwhelming. The deck was slick with blood and foam from the fire hoses. Jimmy Legg, his face blackened with soot, is helping to carry a wounded man to a makeshift aid station when the air raid siren blares again. A desperate, tired voice crackles over the ship's intercom, many bogeys. Closing fast. All hands brace for impact. Captain Beckton, his voice hoarse but steady, orders, right full rudder. All guns, fire at will. Don't let any of them through. Jimmy looks up. The sky is full of them. Not just 1 or 2. A swarm. 20, maybe 30 planes, coming from all points of the compass. It's a coordinated attack, a banzai charge from the sky. What happens next is 80 minutes of pure, unadulterated hell. The Laffey becomes the epicenter of the storm. A Yokosuka D-4Y, Judy, dive bomber screams down, strafing the bridge with its machine guns. Glass shatters. Men scream and fall. Jimmy feels a hot sting in his arm as a piece of shrapnel tears through his sleeve. He ignores it. The ship's guns are firing so fast the barrels glow. A kamikaze is hit head-on by a 5-inch shell and disintegrates in a spectacular fireball. The crew cheers for a split second, only to see 2 more planes emerging from the smoke. One, a Zero, clips the radar mast and cartwheels into the sea, its bomb detonating on impact and showering the deck with shrapnel and seawater. Another slams directly into the port side, the explosion rocking the ship so violently Jimmy is thrown from his feet. A fireball rolls across the deck, searing everything in its path. Through the smoke and chaos, Jimmy sees a Najima B-5 and Kate torpedo bomber coming in low and slow, right for the bridge. It's so close he can see the pilot's head, wrapped in a white Hachimaki headband. Their eyes meet for a fraction of a second. There's no hatred there. No rage. Just a blank, determined resolve. It's a look that will haunt Jimmy Legg for the rest of his life. The 20mm gunners on the bridge wings pour fire into the plane. Pieces fly off. The engine coughs black smoke. But it doesn't deviate. It keeps coming. Brace for impact, someone screams. At the last possible second, the pilot's aim is off by a few feet. The plane's wing clips the edge of the bridge and the fuselage slams into the base of the superstructure, its bomb exploding with a concussive roar. The shockwave knocks everyone down. Jimmy's world goes silent, replaced by a high-pitched ringing. He's covered in debris, in blood that isn't his. When the smoke clears, he sees the bridge is a charnel house. Men he had joked with an hour ago are gone. But the Laffy is still afloat. Her engines are still running. Her remaining guns are still firing. When the attack finally ends, the Laffy has survived. She was hit by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs. She suffered 103 casualties, 32 dead and 71 wounded. But she didn't sink. Her crew, pushed to the absolute brink of human endurance, had fought off the modern equivalent of a banzai charge and lived. For Jimmy Legg, and for every sailor who survived the kamikaze onslaught at Okinawa, the war was no longer about grand strategy or patriotism. It was a raw, personal fight for survival against an enemy whose willingness to die was his greatest weapon. The Battle of Okinawa dragged on for 82 days. It was the bloodiest battle of the Pacific Campaign. Over 12,000 Americans were killed, and nearly 40,000 wounded. The Japanese lost over 110,000 soldiers. Tens of thousands of Okinawan civilians perished, many in mass suicides, driven by the same propaganda that had fueled the banzai charges. When it was finally over, the United States military stood at the threshold of Japan. They had the plans for the invasion, Operation Downfall. And as they looked at the casualty projections, estimates of up to 1 million American dead and countless Japanese, the ghost of the bamboo spear and the specter of the kamikaze loomed large. They now understood, with a chilling finality, what they were facing. They were not facing an army that could be defeated by breaking its lines or sinking its ships. They were facing a nation that had institutionalized death as a virtue. A banzai charge on a scale of tens of millions of people, men, women, and children, all potentially armed with sharpened bamboo, waiting on the beaches of Kyushu. The laughter that had once greeted the idea of a primitive spear had been utterly extinguished. It was replaced by a grim, horrifying certainty. The spirit that created the banzai charge and the kamikaze would not surrender. It would have to be annihilated at a cost that was too terrible to contemplate. This understanding, forged in the fires of Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, directly influenced the most fateful decision of the 20th century, the use of the atomic bomb. It was seen not as an act of wanton destruction, but as a terrible, necessary alternative to a final, apocalyptic banzai charge that would have consumed an entire nation. The journey that started with a nervous chuckle in a foxhole ended with the world-altering flash over Hiroshima. The American GI had stopped laughing because he had finally, truly understood his enemy. And in that understanding, he found not hatred, but a sober, awful respect for the power of a spirit so fierce it would rather grasp a bamboo spear than raise a white flag. The legacy of that charge is not just in the history books. It's etched into the soul of a generation and into the very DNA of the modern world. It is the ultimate lesson in the cost of underestimation and the terrifying power of the human will for both creation and destruction. The war ended not with a bang, but with the ghostly, echoing silence of a world holding its breath. On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the instruments of surrender were signed. The guns fell silent. The kamikazes did not take off. The bamboo spears were laid down. For the first time in nearly 4 years, the Pacific was peaceful. But for the men who had fought there, the Jimmy O'Haras, the Preachers, the Gunny McCloskeys, the Jimmy Legs, the war was not over. It had simply moved. It had packed its bags, with all its horrors and its ghosts, and taken up residence inside their minds. They came home to parades and grateful handshakes, to the sweet, unfamiliar smell of cut grass and the warm embrace of loved ones. They tried to slip back into the lives they had left behind, to become the boys they once were. But they were not boys anymore. They were men who had seen the other side of a dark mountain, and the view had changed them forever. The laughter was gone, replaced by a quiet that their families couldn't understand. They jumped at the backfire of a car, mistaking it for an 88mm shell. They'd wake in the middle of the night, their sheets soaked with sweat, the screams of the charging enemy or the drone of a dying aircraft engine still ringing in their ears. They had learned the calculus of death, and it was a math problem that had no clean answer, one that kept repeating itself in their dreams. This, then, is the final part of our story. Not the story of battles and campaigns, but the story of the aftermath. The story of the legacy left not on maps, but on the human heart. It's about how the confrontation with the bamboo spear and the spirit behind it shaped the men who fought, the nation they returned to, and the very world we live in today. Let's check in on our men years later. Jimmy O'Hara came back to Chicago. He got his old job back at the printing press. He married his sweetheart, Kathy. They had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. On the surface, he was fine. He was a good provider, a quiet neighbor. But Kathy noticed things. He never talked about the war. Not a word. If a war movie came on the television, he'd get up and leave the room, his face a closed door. On the 4th of July, when the neighborhood kids set off firecrackers, he'd retreat to the basement, his hands shaking until the noise stopped. He'd built a wall around that part of his life, a wall so high and so thick he thought nothing could get in or out. But the memories were like water, they always find the cracks. He'd see his son playing with a toy sword, shouting, and a vision of that final, screaming charge on Saipan would flash behind his eyes, so vivid he could smell the cordite. The laughter was a distant, shameful memory. He had learned that there are some things in this world that are beyond laughter, beyond understanding. They just are. And you carry them. Preacher Jones went back to Alabama. He didn't talk much about the war either, but for a different reason. He didn't have a wall. He had a ledger of lives, a balance sheet of the dead. He'd sit on his porch in the evening, whittling a piece of wood, and the faces would come to him. The faces of the Japanese boys he'd cut down with his machine gun. The face of the young Marine in the next foxhole on Tarawa, whose name he never knew, who took a sniper's bullet right between the eyes. He'd think about the sheer, dumb luck that had kept him alive when so many better men had fallen. He found a kind of peace, not in forgetting, but in acceptance. He became a deacon in his church, not because he was a holy man, but because he had seen hell, and he needed to believe in something that could wash away its stain. For Preacher, the war was a sermon he'd never stop preaching to himself, a lesson in the fragility of life and the depth of the human soul, in all its darkness and its light. And what of the enemy? The spirit that wielded the bamboo spear did not simply vanish. For the Japanese soldier who survived, the return was often even more difficult. They came home to a defeated, shattered nation. The God Emperor had renounced his divinity. The code of Bushido that had sent them on suicidal charges was now seen by many as a tragic, fatal error that had led their country to ruin. They carried not only the trauma of combat, but the heavy weight of a national shame they had been taught was worse than death. Many buried their pasts even deeper than the American veterans, silent ghosts in their own land. This was the universal soldier's truth on both sides of the conflict. The battlefield is temporary. The war you fight inside yourself is forever. The experience of the Pacific War and the specific, brutal education provided by the Banzai Charge and its successors fundamentally reshaped the American national character in the post-war era. Before the war, America was an insular power, albeit a growing one. Its military thinking was often conventional, rooted in European traditions of warfare. The fight against Japan was a crash course in a different kind of conflict. It was a war against an ideology, a culture, a way of thinking that was utterly alien. The United States had to adapt, and adapt it did. It developed new technologies: the flamethrower, the amphibious tractor, proximity fuses for anti-aircraft shells. It developed new tactics: the corkscrew and blowtorch, the combat air patrol. But more importantly, it developed a new understanding of the world. The GIs who came home from the Pacific brought with them a hard-earned, gritty realism. They had learned that there were enemies in this world who could not be reasoned with, who could not be bought, and who would not quit. This was a stark departure from the optimistic, almost naive view that had prevailed before Pearl Harbor. This newfound realism became a cornerstone of the Cold War mentality that would dominate the next half-century. The lesson of the bamboo spear was applied to the nuclear standoff with the Soviet Union. Do not underestimate your enemy's resolve. Understand their ideology, their culture, their willingness to sacrifice. The domino theory, in Vietnam, the containment policy, all of it was informed on some level by the memory of what happened when a fanatical, expansionist power was underestimated and appeased. The war also forged a new kind of American patriotism. It wasn't the flag-waving jingoism of a bygone era. It was a quieter, more profound patriotism, tempered in the fires of a shared, horrific experience. It was a patriotism built on the bond between the men in the foxhole, the understanding that the guy next to you, no matter where he was from or what he looked like, was your brother. This greatest generation ethos of duty, sacrifice, and quiet resilience became the moral compass for the nation for decades to come. They had stared into the heart of darkness, and they had returned not with boasts, but with a solemn determination to build a better world, a world where such darkness would not have to be faced by their children. So, what does the story of the bamboo spear have to say to us today, in a world of drones and cyber warfare? The weapons have changed, but the human heart has not. The lessons of the Pacific War are timeless. Lesson 1. Underestimation is a pre-existing condition for defeat. The initial laughter at the bamboo spear was a symptom of a dangerous arrogance. The Americans looked at a piece of sharpened wood and saw primitiveness. They failed, at first, to see the indomitable spirit it represented. In our own lives, whether in business, in politics, or in personal conflicts, we make the same mistake. We underestimate rivals because their resources seem meager, their methods unorthodox, or their beliefs alien. The story of the Pacific War screams at us. Look deeper. Understand the why, not just the what. The most dangerous weapon is not always the biggest gun. It is the strongest will. Lesson 2. Culture is a weapon system. The United States won the Pacific War with its industrial might, its unmatched ability to produce ships, planes, and bombs. But Japan, with far fewer material resources, prolonged the war and inflicted horrific casualties with its cultural might, its belief system, its code of honor, its spiritual fervor. The war was a brutal object lesson in the fact that conflict is not just a contest of technology, but a clash of cultures. To win a war or to avoid one, you must understand the culture of your adversary. You must know what they value, what they fear, and what they are willing to die for. Lesson 3. The human spirit is the ultimate battlefield. The most important victories and the most devastating defeats in the Pacific happened not on maps, but in the minds of men. The American triumph was, at its core, a psychological one. They had to overcome not only the enemy across from them, but the fear and horror within themselves. They had to learn to function, to lead, to care for each other, in the face of a form of warfare designed to break their will. This is the ultimate lesson in resilience. It's not about being unafraid. It's about being terrified and moving forward anyway. It's about finding a cause, the man next to you, the family back home, that is bigger than your fear. The men who fought this war are leaving us now. Their voices, once a mighty chorus, are fading into a whisper. With them goes the living memory of the sound a bamboo spear makes when it clatters against an M1 Garand, the smell of a flamethrower igniting a cave, the sight of a kamikaze plane refusing to turn away. But their story is our inheritance. It is a story that demands to be told, not as a simple tale of good versus evil, but as the complex, tragic, and ultimately triumphant saga that it was. It is a story of a nation learning, the hard way, to take the measure of its enemies and, in doing so, taking the measure of itself. So the next time you are tempted to laugh at something that seems primitive, or to dismiss an adversary because their methods seem irrational, remember the bamboo spear. Remember the laughter that died in 1,000 throats on 100 Pacific islands. Remember that courage and conviction can be the great equalizers, and that the human will is the most powerful and most terrifying force on this earth. The charge is over. The silence has returned. But if you listen closely in the quiet of your own mind, you can still hear its echo. It's an echo that asks us a simple, enduring question. What will we do when our moment comes? Will we laugh? Or will we understand? The legacy of those men, the legacy of the spear, rests on our answer. This newfound realism became a cornerstone of the Cold War mentality that would dominate the next half-century. The lesson of the bamboo spear was applied to the nuclear standoff with the Soviet Union. Do not underestimate your enemy's resolve. Understand their ideology, their culture, their willingness to sacrifice. The domino theory, in Vietnam, the containment policy, all of it was informed on some level by the memory of what happened when a fanatical, expansionist power was underestimated and appeased. The war also forged a new kind of American patriotism. It wasn't the flag-waving jingoism of a bygone era. It was a quieter, more profound patriotism, tempered in the fires of a shared, horrific experience. It was a patriotism built on the bond between the men in the foxhole, the understanding that the guy next to you, no matter where he was from or what he looked like, was your brother. This greatest generation ethos of duty, sacrifice, and quiet resilience became the moral compass for the nation for decades to come. They had stared into the heart of darkness, and they had returned not with boasts, but with a solemn determination to build a better world, a world where such darkness would not have to be faced by their children. So, what does the story of the bamboo spear have to say to us today, in a world of drones and cyber warfare? The weapons have changed, but the human heart has not. The lessons of the Pacific War are timeless. Lesson 1. Underestimation is a pre-existing condition for defeat. The initial laughter at the bamboo spear was a symptom of a dangerous arrogance. The Americans looked at a piece of sharpened wood and saw primitiveness. They failed, at first, to see the indomitable spirit it represented. In our own lives, whether in business, in politics, or in personal conflicts, we make the same mistake. We underestimate rivals because their resources seem meager, their methods unorthodox, or their beliefs alien. The story of the Pacific War screams at us. Look deeper. Understand the why, not just the what. The most dangerous weapon is not always the biggest gun. It is the strongest will. Lesson 2. Culture is a weapon system. The United States won the Pacific War with its industrial might, its unmatched ability to produce ships, planes, and bombs. But Japan, with far fewer material resources, prolonged the war and inflicted horrific casualties with its cultural might, its belief system, its code of honor, its spiritual fervor. The war was a brutal object lesson in the fact that conflict is not just a contest of technology, but a clash of cultures. To win a war or to avoid one, you must understand the culture of your adversary. You must know what they value, what they fear, and what they are willing to die for. Lesson 3. The human spirit is the ultimate battlefield. The most important victories and the most devastating defeats in the Pacific happened not on maps, but in the minds of men. The American triumph was, at its core, a psychological one. They had to overcome not only the enemy across from them, but the fear and horror within themselves. They had to learn to function, to lead, to care for each other, in the face of a form of warfare designed to break their will. This is the ultimate lesson in resilience. It's not about being unafraid. It's about being terrified and moving forward anyway. It's about finding a cause, the man next to you, the family back home, that is bigger than your fear. The men who fought this war are leaving us now. Their voices, once a mighty chorus, are fading into a whisper. With them goes the living memory of the sound a bamboo spear makes when it clatters against an M1 Garand, the smell of a flamethrower igniting a cave, the sight of a kamikaze plane refusing to turn away. But their story is our inheritance. It is a story that demands to be told, not as a simple tale of good versus evil, but as the complex, tragic, and ultimately triumphant saga that it was. It is a story of a nation learning, the hard way, to take the measure of its enemies and, in doing so, taking the measure of itself. So the next time you are tempted to laugh at something that seems primitive, or to dismiss an adversary because their methods seem irrational, remember the bamboo spear. Remember the laughter that died in 1,000 throats on 100 Pacific islands. Remember that courage and conviction can be the great equalizers, and that the human will is the most powerful and most terrifying force on this earth. The charge is over. The silence has returned. But if you listen closely in the quiet of your own mind, you can still hear its echo. It's an echo that asks us a simple, enduring question. What will we do when our moment comes? Will we laugh? Or will we understand? The legacy of those men, the legacy of the spear, rests on our answer.